Thank you for joining us for Indigenous Voices, a Think ND series where you can engage with a legacy of diverse Native American cultures and celebrate the art and self-expression of Indigenous artists who enrich our lives through dance, music, song, fashion, and the decorative and visual arts. I'm Tara Kenjockety, the undergraduate community engagement and anthropology librarian at the Hesburgh Libraries here at the University of Notre Dame. I am an enrolled member of the Ho-Chunk Nation and in part Seneca Nation. I am also active member of the Notre Dame's Native American initiatives. I offer support to our Native American Student Association of Notre Dame and also actively participate in the Indigenous staff and faculty group. The Raclin Murphy Museum of Art acknowledges our presence on traditional land of the Potawatomi peoples, the Miami peoples, and many people from other Indigenous nations that now call this land home. As an initial step towards reconciliation and out of a desire for a brighter and more equitable future, the museum is committed to amplifying Indigenous voices and building conversation and collaboration through the hosting and support of Indigenous artists, art forms, and communities. At this time, I want to thank all of the co-sponsors of Indigenous Voices, the Raclin Murphy Museum of Art, the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, the Notre Dame Initiative on Race and Resilience, the Native American Initiatives at the College of Arts and Letters, the Native American Alumni, and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. And now I'd like to welcome Sarah Sentz, an artist from Sacramento, California. Sarah received her BA from California State University Chico in 2003 and her MFA from Parsons, the New School for Design in New York in 2005. In addition to her curatorial and directorial work, she has been practicing photo weaving with traditional basket techniques from her Chitimacha and Choctaw family since 2004. And it is this practice that is the hallmark of her work, Hinushi 10, which was acquired by the Raclin Murphy Museum of Art for its permanent collection earlier this year, and which we'll be discussing today. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be a part of that collection and to be here speaking with you today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. PhotoFutures is a collaborative collecting group at the Raclin Murphy Museum of Art that acquires contemporary photography for the University of Notre Dame. Designed for students of any major, this 7-session co-curricular program combines issues related to museum collecting, contemporary photography, and socially engaged artistic practice. Students critique individual photographs and evaluate artists' portfolios, and also engage in critical discussions with curators and select staff. Ultimately, students develop their own collecting criteria to recommend a photograph for acquisition that adds value to the permanent collection of the Raclin Murphy Museum and supports the mission of the university. The theme for fall 2024 was indigenizing photography, and the piece chosen by the group was your artwork, Hinushi 10. I was honored to attend one of the sessions to assist with the discussion from an anthropological librarian standpoint, offering some research context for the indigenizing photography theme. How did you come to know your piece was being considered for acquisition, and how did you feel about the context for that?
I think that I got an email early on saying that I was a part of this process with a group of students. And I was very, honored and not so much like hopeful, but just the fact that I was being considered and that the students and the faculty that were working with the students had selected me to be a part of the discussion along with these other artists who I admire. So when it was chosen and the letter was shared with me, I was, obviously quite excited about it. And I just appreciate being a part of that conversation and also a part of the collection there at the Raclin Museum.
That's great. So, Hinushi 10 isn't necessarily what we might think of when we think of the word photograph. Can you tell us a little bit about this work and how you approached it?
So, when I was first approached by the Choctaw Nation, and I think it was initially in 2023, to work with a couple of women there, Shauna Williams and Claire Green, both Choctaw, who were, one was working as, Claire was working as a curator at the Choctaw Cultural Center, and Shauna was working on the art for renovation of a hotel at the Choctaw Nation in Durant. And it was like, ironically, both of them had contacted me about the same time. It was like within a 24-hour time period. And they both wanted me to be involved in the hotel and the museum. And they didn't know that they had been in touch with me at the same time. And so I think it didn't, pretty quickly we put it together that there was an opportunity there for me to do a larger body of work that would be a part of the cultural center and also a part of the hotel. So obviously both have very different the purpose is different of a hotel, right? And the purpose of a cultural center museum is different, right? But I think that when I was looking at what I could make for those two spaces, there was no reason why it would be anything different, because the audiences, while they may be different and going into that space for different reasons, the information could be relevant for both, if that makes sense. So if somebody is walking into a hotel and can be stopped by art and, pause to be able to consider an idea or a thought or a political statement, perhaps being caught off guard in some way, that can be impactful in the same way that somebody may be going into an institution or a museum to specifically look for information to be, to be impacted by art, to be impacted by a story or by writing, by curatorial objectives. And so with those two different types of audiences and those two different purposes, I asked to look at some maps that would be at the cultural center archive. And when I went there, I wasn't that much later, just a few weeks later, because I was going to be in New York and I was able to go back through Oklahoma on my way home from New York. And so I went to Durant, visited the cultural center and the hotel space and also the archive. And the maps that they had pulled for me were blue allotment maps, kind of like architectural, like lands maps. And there was about just over 40 of these maps. And they were probably like 2 feet by 2.5 feet tall. And each map had a grid on it. And I believe that if you took all the maps and put them together, you would be able to see the larger space of what is McCurtain County. So McCurtain County includes Broken Bow, which is where my grandmother grew up and where my Choctaw family was relocated to after the Trail of Tears. So this felt, first being given the opportunity to make the work for these two spaces, but then being shown these maps that directly related to my ancestry and to the story of removal and the story of allotment and the story of the Choctaw Nation right away was just so gripping. And for me, it really took a hold of emotionally and mentally, took a hold of all these different spaces in me. And I really thought about it very deeply and considered what the maps meant. The first thing I did is I photographed all of the maps there with the curator and the archivist. And then with that, we, went to council to get permission for me to work with the maps. So initially, these pieces were four very large pieces, 40 inches by 80 inches. And I wove through it landscapes from where my grandma grew up and where we still have family living. So in Broken Bow. And then the landscapes from, I always kind of put in like landscapes of where I'm from, just to kind of like root down like place of where the work is being made. And then there was also photographs of the journals of the Lewis and Clark exhibition. So I got to see one of the original journals that was like hand drawn maps, you know, handwritten notes from the Lewis and Clark expedition. And again, I was able to photograph those maps. And that was at the Historical Society in St. Louis in Missouri. So these four pieces had those maps from Lewis and Clark, which to me were really significant with the understanding of land, the understanding of how to colonize the land. Where are the rivers? Where are people living? Where are the mountains? So basically, taking all of this information and then bringing it back to the president, bringing it back to government so that there's an opportunity to then manipulate space, manipulate land, take land. And I thought that was like an important part of the story of allotment and of the story of removal. So those first four pieces, three went into that hotel space, and then one went to the cultural center. That summer, I was back at the British Library in London, where I had been extending a fellowship, and I found some oil maps of that same area. So the allotment maps are from 1902. And then I found this one oil map that was from, I want to say like 1915, but it was in 5 different languages. And so this oil map of Oklahoma was accessible to people. It was in Russian, Spanish, French, English, and I can't remember. I'd have to like reference the map, and I can do that for you guys. So imagine all these different languages
Yeah.
telling people, obviously, I don't know the terminology for people who are in the business of oil, but the maps showed where oil might be in Oklahoma. And this is just, a decade or less, around a decade after allotment. So I
Yeah.
think if we go back to that era, like a little over 100 years ago, you lose your land, and our ancestors lost their land. They're removed. They're then given new land. They're given an allotment number. Their name is recorded. How native they are is recorded as like half breed, full breed. So there's all of this sort of cataloging of people. And then there's also the concept of land ownership. And that's what allotment land essentially was. Now, with that understanding of oil being present there, and all of a sudden, the land has a new type of value. So, with a whole community of Native people who have just been displaced, being shown value of land and trying to be convinced to like be custodians of this new land. But then on the side, there's now other agendas with the land because now there's more value than what was initially recognized. So after I finished those four maps, those four weavings, and I found that map at the British Library, I wanted to do more. I wanted to include the expedition of Lewis and Clark, the allotment maps, the landscape of Broken Bow, and then the oil maps, because it was one extra layer to the story. And I think for me, because I had the permission and I had the story, it took me a while to feel okay with that. I'm very careful about, working with imagery and how it comes to me and what it means. And so I think a couple months later, I made 4 pieces that were 4 feet by 4 feet, just about. I think they were like 46 inches by 46 inches. And they had those maps in them. And the work was first shown in Paris, France. And so I also did maps of the area that were created by France. So when France was, as you know, you're a librarian. A lot of these maps from the 1700s are in French maps and British maps and Spanish maps,
Yeah.
and there's so much land claim, right? And so I did include some French maps that were mostly a lot of these that I'm looking at are of the Mississippi River for obvious reasons. Like, this is such a huge river, a huge force of water that goes right through North America. And so, yeah, so that was it. So I think there was just a lot to look at and think about with those 4 pieces. And then after I made those works, I had been asked by Arizona State University to make new work that related to Edward S. Curtis. So while a fellow at the British Library, they had all of the Edward S. Curtis prints. And I didn't know, because I was there for so many weeks living in London and spending time in the library. I rephotographed each one. I've never done anything with them except look at them and physically hold each one and photograph each one in a few days. When ASU asked me to do something new for this exhibition about Edward S. Curtis, and I think they asked 6 Native artists, director of the museum really wanted us to incorporate the Edward S. Curtis photography. And I didn't speak to any of the other artists, but I thought initially, okay, I could work with those, that imagery, but I couldn't find the connecting story. And so what I decided to do instead was think about what photography is today, what like photographing Native people means today. And so I did photos of my oldest son, Archie, at Broken Bow and, on Broken Bow Lake, but also on our family land where my grandma grew up. And I included a selfie of us as well. Because I was like, well, what's like the biggest change in, photography in the last 175, almost 200 years? It's selfies, I think. Like selfies, Instagram, like the accessibility of the camera. So that was important to me that I had, incorporated that. And so I did 6 pieces. A lot of them are just Archie, like in that landscape. There is one that's a selfie of he and I, which will be a gift to him one day. And I have it back in my studio now. And that's really like about us and for him and very personal. And the other ones they're just about bringing my son back home, to that land, whether we're going back to Chitimacha in Louisiana or back to Choctaw in Oklahoma. All of it is relevant and all of it is important. And so these pieces really act as a documentation of that, in the same way that Edward S. Curtis was, I'm using my quote fingers now, like documenting, and his purpose of documenting is totally different. Because if his is the dying Indian, again, my quote fingers are up if somebody's just listening to this, then my document was Indigenous futures, the future of our kids, the future of our land's connectivity and continuation of culture and family and community.
And what a way to do the opposite of what he did and put the camera in somebody else's hands,
Yeah.
in your son's hands as well.
And I think that's a really good point. He did also take my camera and he was also taking photos. So he was very much like an active part of the photo process. But see, I feel like that's very much a part of as a mother, as a weaver, when I get to go back to Oklahoma or to Louisiana, I always want to spend time learning as much as I can because I don't live there. And so I need to take, that's part of being a mother to these kids, these 3 boys, is continuing to take them back there, exposing them to the weaving and teaching them the weaving too, but also teaching them, like, this is a part of who you are. And just because we don't live on the reservation right now, there's no reason why we can't be a part of the community. And that's a real challenge because life is very busy. So taking the time to teach your children to weave or to learn how to take photos or to engage in community, to meet your elders, to spend time with your family, all of that is, to me, a part of my mothering.
Yeah. So, how does this piece fit into the greater body of your work as well, since then and maybe before?
Well, I think that story that I just told of being shown those allotment maps, and then that story continuing with the photography of Broken Bow and then the photographs in St. Louis, and it sort of built up to these smaller works. And I think for me, having this one piece that was originally made for ASU to then come to Notre Dame, and there's one more twist to this story, is that Archie was born in Ireland. When I was traveling, I did a project called Weaving the Americas, and I traveled through North, Central, and South America and lived in Central and South America for almost 3 years. From there, I went to Southeast Asia, was there for about half a year. And then I had a show in Chile, and I had a show in England, and I went to England. While I was living around the world, I met my husband in England, and we moved to Ireland together. Our first son was born. Now it's Archie, the boy in the photo. Because he's our eldest, he definitely has traveled with me the most. I'm close to all of my boys, but he is very easy to travel with. So, and he loves it. And he is very proud of all of his heritage. He's very proud of being Chitimacha and Choctaw. And I think he's proud of being British. He doesn't talk about that as much, but he's very proud to be Irish. And I think it's because it's such a unique situation, like being born in Ireland to a British parent. He then has that right to Irish citizenship, which we made sure we secured for him. So just so he has all of this, just it's like more freedom in a way. And for me, that piece, and I didn't realize it until I was back there, I think it was March last year. And I'm not sure when I was there, winter sometime. And seeing the piece there and seeing how Irish that university is, like how Irish Notre Dame is, it just felt so fitting to see Archie hanging in the museum. And he has like the Choctaw sun and star pattern woven through him on Broken Bow, and just standing there, being present in that space, looking out into the water, but then like hanging in a museum where there's all this Irish pride. And I was just, I don't know, the whole thing feels so meaningful to me. And that's pretty ironic, I guess. And also, maybe it's just meant to be that way.
Yeah, I think that it's just amazing how you found such amazing stories and history within maps, just how that kind of just developed for you so organically and then was woven together with these just common histories and different perspectives pulled together and to the modern day. I mean, it's a really amazing, for lack of a better word, because I know that we're talking about weaving, how it's just interwoven all of these stories within the piece.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, your work is currently on view through December 2025 at the Zimmerly Art Museum at Rutgers as a part of the show Indigenous Identities Here, Now, Always. How is the community of Indigenous artists living and working right now coming together to meet the moment we find ourselves in? And what does it mean to you to be a part of that community?
I think it really hit me during that lockdown period when museums were closing and there was so much change and we weren't sure how things were going to change. And I know I can speak to, I would assume everybody, because we all experienced this really, difficult time. And for me, we had just moved from England back to the United States like 2 months before lockdown, 2, 3 months before it all happened. And COVID hadn't happened yet. It was November. So everything hadn't happened. So we were already going through this big transition. And then there was lockdown. And then all my contracts were canceled, right? So, like anything that was going on in England or Europe or here, gone. And I thought this is it. It's done. And it made me very sad. And there was one particular project, like a huge research project that I was working on with the British Library. And I haven't seen it, I haven't really done it to it completely. I've done parts of it in a way, but that was just gone. It was just, you know, and I remember being really sad, and then Florida State University asked me to do something and they even said, we have to spend this money. And at the time, as an artist, like I was totally broke, 3 kids, like, and they were like, we want to give you this money to make this work. And I bought a printer and I used an old computer and I got all the supplies I needed. Anything. I basically refilled my studio. My husband built my studio, which we're in right now. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And I had a very young baby, and guess he must have been before he had turned 1, because I think it was the year 2001. So he was going to turn 1. But it was like a time where, like he put his cot right next to my studio and I would rock him and nurse him to sleep. And then I'd go back in the studio and I could listen for him. But he was there with me through this whole process of making these pieces, and they never felt finished to me. And I don't know why, but they're huge. They're actually right. These are them right here. And people get really curious about them. And I'm always like, they're so big, you can't frame them. And then as soon as I tell them the size, they forget about it. They're for the future. These are for the future. But they got shipped to Florida. Florida framed them. And then they had to take them out of the frame because then the shipping was too much with the framings. They sent them back. But the reason why I'm telling this story is because that for me was me like showing myself, like, even though we went through having a third baby, an international move, lockdown, being totally broke, like we went through all this stuff. I was so determined to keep making the art that I believed in and doing what I do because it's who I am. And then I remember it must have been in St. Louis. And I was invited to come out to be on a panel. And I walked into a room of paintings and I saw a Diani Whitehawk next to, I can't remember what other paintings were in the room, but it was like the typical, people you would see in the contemporary or modern painting rooms. And I was like, yes, like I just felt so proud. And at that moment, I was like, I'm so glad I didn't stop, because here we are, we're finally getting our recognition. The fact that I was even there to sit on a panel with other women to talk about my work, and then to see Native artists in that space, but not just Native artists in Native exhibitions where it's categorized, but mixed in with, this is contemporary, this is American contemporary painting, and
Yeah.
that means something, because that's the way the art history books should be written. And that's for me, that's the biggest shift and transition from that lockdown period. And I'm like grateful to myself in a way. But more than that, I look at this community that I've been a part of for 20 years and I'm like, I'm just blown away by friends, colleagues, people I haven't even met yet. I can't even keep up. Like, I'm trying to constantly read and see show. There's like a show here at the Crocker. There's a show at the De Young. I have my list. I'm like trying to get away to see, all these superstars. It's incredible. It's so exciting. It's exciting even though we are in such like, for me, this is such an unpredictable, like, scary time. And so again, I'm glad we're not giving up, and we have to just keep going and keep fighting for what we believe in.
That's a really positive message. And I can't wait to share this podcast with my own daughter who studied fine arts, and she's a sculptor, and just liked her to hear some of these inspiring tales of people not giving up, even when you're faced with challenges like the lockdown and other things. It's just incredible. So, in their letter recommending Hinushi 10 for acquisition, the student group wrote, Census Peace articulates how cultural practices evolve and are not a figment of the past, but instead a means of advancing modern ideas and identity. Can you share with us what you are working on now, and where is your art headed next?
So that's a really good question. And I think my most like honest answer is that I am looking to be like quite political and in a respectful, accessible way. And it has taken me a long time to figure out how to do that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm not going to discuss all of it right now, but there's, I think that when you're making something and it's going to be hung, in a gallery or a museum, you're putting your name on it. It can be very loaded. And what I never want to happen with what I make is for anybody to be like, to pass by or to not feel engaged. And one thing that I think is really important, and what I admire in other artists and what I try to achieve in my art, is just like layers. And being, that first layer for me is something that is hopefully like, it can be beautiful or it can be evocative, something that pulls you in. And then once you're there, there's another layer to that story. And if you have the time to look at it or read about it, then you can access that. And then it goes deeper and deeper. And I think the reason why I'm particularly interested in doing that with my work is because I want to be accessible to a whole host of people. I don't want to only be interesting to look at to this age group or this community. I want it to be bigger than that. I've lived in a lot of different places. I've lived in different countries. I've spent time with kids. I've spent time with elders. Like, I feel I am kind of diverse already. And I think that's my reason for that. So, as much as I want to take all of my frustration and my anger and my just like disappointment and things that are happening, I have made a very careful decision for myself and for my art to go slow, because I am an emotional person and my instinct is to be like, boom, really quick and really fast and really hard. And I've learned over the years, I'm now 45, that's not the way to always get through. So my Instagram is present, but I've actually stopped posting because what I want to post is probably something that would make me like, it could be alienating, if that makes sense. So I'm slowing down in a way and being careful and thinking about how I can present these layers so that it goes deeper and deeper. That's the more effective way for me to reach people. I've said that, and that makes me sounds like I'm like doing something really important, but I'm just a part of this larger community, but I want to be careful about it. So I have a few things that I want to work on specifically. So what I've started on is land and national parks. this summer, I gave a talk as a visiting artist at a symposium at the Antiquarian Society in Worcester. The library there has books of land deeds, historical documents, where I was able to find land deeds of Avery Island, which is ancestral Chitimacha homelands, land deeds of Choctaw land that was taken. They also have historical photography. Monica Bravo, a photo historian at Princeton University, pulled these wonderful images out, and I got to photograph them and work with them. This new work that I've just finished, I'm going to give her all the credit she deserves because I didn't even know these photos existed. One of them is of painting, and he's surrounded by Native men. And that whole concept of painting Yosemite and these really big landscapes without anybody in it. And what does that mean? There's an agenda there, and it's more than just beauty, it's a land grab. And that photo, so I've just done a body of work that has 6 pieces. Ideally, the whole thing would hang as one piece. And I've repeated that image, I think 4 times in the piece in different ways, just to really be clear. This happened. This is how he was painting. He was surrounded by the men that he was erasing. He was surrounded by the native culture that he was erasing. The presence was there. And then this summer, I also went to some of the national parks here in California. We have 6 or 7. I don't remember, maybe 9. I can't remember. I think it's 7. Where I took my boys and went with my mom too. My mom also came and my dad. And so did some photography and then mixed those photographs of the parks with the historical park photos. Some maps from the antiquarian and land deeds. So again, looking at where, who owns this land? What does that mean to own it? What is the purpose of a national park? What was the purpose and what is current purpose, and what's the future of it? And why not give it back? Why not give it back to the original people who were always meant to be the custodians, the stewards, the protectors of the land? So that's my first political agenda. That's what I'm working on right now. And for this particular work, for the first time, I included river cane that I have back in Louisiana that I cut, harvested, I split, peeled, did the whole thing. And I tied the reed into the weaving. So again, for me, that was like my way. Rather than weaving a basket, I was weaving the photos, but then I tied the reeds into the weaving to then root it back down again to the land.
Oh, I love that. Well, thank you, Sarah, for sharing your work with us. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. You can find more information about Sarah and her work at sarahsense.com. That's SARAHSENSE. If you'd like to explore more from Indigenous voices and check out any of the 95 plus series on ThinkND, visit us at think.nd.edu. Please feel free to tell your friends. ThinkND is open to all. Until next time, inspire your mind and spark conversations.
Oh, did I talk too much? I talk so much. You can sit
No,
here,
that was
whatever.
perfect. Oh, that was wonderful.
Oh,
That was
good.
so
I'm
great.
surprised I was able to talk that much. That's good.
No, that was
Okay.
wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
You were amazing. I loved it, and I'm so excited for my daughter to hear this. She's
Oh,
26, And she had gone to school for fine arts and everything, and she's done some graphic design as well, but I think she's just kind of hit walls, and kind of been frustrated
I
and
call them
things,
the
and I'm
brick
just
walls, and you just run right into them.
yep.
I know. My kids are so young still. I'm like just trying to help them with training them to do homework.
Yeah,
I'm at that stage, but that's hard. That's really hard when they're adults and they're like trying to figure it
yeah,
out. And especially like following a passionate career where you're not driven by money. And that's unique in the worlds that we live in because everybody's thinking about, and we're trained to pay bills
yeah,
and you have to do that too. And that's the thing with art. And I remember one of my professors at Parsons saying this. She's like, the art students are the hardest working students.
yeah,
And I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I understand what she was saying. It's not easy and that stigma that it's like, you're just making and you're just creative. It's not, there's so much
no,
more to it. And, working in museums helps. Being an assistant to an artist is helpful. I was an assistant to a museum director. I ran a gallery in New York. You can
mm,
teach there. You do all these other jobs and they're all learning. You learn and learn. Even now, like it was hard for me to make art when I was running a gallery or working for
sure,
Annie Philbin or, it's hard to make art. Let me tell you, it's hard to make art when you have 3 kids. It's always hard.
yeah. There's gonna
Like
be new things.
it's always hard. And then when you get to that point where it's, oh, if you get to a point where you can pay your bills with your art or you marry rich and you don't have to, and you don't have to work and do the extra jobs. Or maybe you find that, oh, actually, I just working in museums. I like meeting the artists. I like writing about the art. I like critiquing the art. But there's so many different things. Like my favorite curators, the most impactful curators in my life, they were all artists first. And it
Yeah,
takes a lot to learn how to talk about art and how to write about art. You're not born with it, like
sure.
you can be born able to make art, but like understanding the history and the critique and the theory and the methodologies, like that's learned. It takes
Yeah,
time. So she just make sure she gets jobs where she's like in the arts and learning and earning and then make
yeah.
learn, earn, make.
Love that.